Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the April 27th Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Sprague.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Here.
Mayor Carlson. Mr. Reitz. Ms. Madriga.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Don. First order of business is I'd like to introduce Michael Redlinger, Assistant City Administrator for the City of Fargo, for the purpose of an introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I just wanted to make an introduction of one of our finance committee members today who will be joining us for at least the next couple of months. Steve Sprague is our interim finance director. Steve is our city auditor in his regular job, but he's helping us out after Kent Costin's recent retirement. And so we look forward to welcoming a new finance director here to the city of Fargo very soon. But until that time, Steve is willing to help us out. He'll be providing some reports here today at the Diversion Finance Committee meeting, willing to help us out with anything. So just really appreciate Steve stepping forward, not only to be our finance director, but also help out the diversion project as well in this interim period. So a big thanks to Steve for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome, Mr. Sprague. To those of us that have been around a while, you're no newbie around here, so you've been around, and we welcome you and look forward to working with you. Item number 2 is the approval of the minutes of March 23rd.
So moved.
Second. Commissioner Mahoney moves. Commissioner Steen seconds. Have been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Roll call vote, or excuse me, voice vote for. All those in favor of approval of the minutes of March 23rd, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 3 is to approve the order of the agenda.
Mahoney, move.
It has been distributed. Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Steen seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 4 is the approval of the bills. Mr. Stephen Sprague.
You have the list of bills in front of you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to research them.
As you can see, there were 4 bills submitted for a total of $612,932.27. Are there any questions of Mr. Sprague?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Redlinger seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the bills as presented by Mr. Sprague. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Sprague.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Reitz.
Aye.
Ms. Madriga.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item number 5 is the finance report. Again, we call on Mr. Steve Sprague.
And again, the finance report was distributed, and I'd be glad to research any questions.
Usually you try to say the balance is a really good amount, and Kent would always embellish it. Bernie, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work.
As long as we hold over $100 million in the net position, I'll be real comfortable. Are there any questions of Mr. Sprague? Not, we'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Is there, Mayor moves, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Steen seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the finance report as presented by Mr. Sprague. Again, Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Aye.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Sprague.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Reitz.
Aye.
Ms. Madriga.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item number 6 is the Executive Director's Financial Report. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board. I'll start out with the revenue status. This is a form that we put in the packet here a number of months ago. And so we've been tracking revenue as it's been coming in. Just a few things to note for this year total. Right now we're at about 2.6 million in sales tax revenue from the city of Fargo, 1.3 million from Cass County. And then you can see a 50% match there, 4 million. So adding those columns, we have about 8.4 million in revenue to date. Take into account this is 30 days behind. So this is a month behind where we are with actuals. I also want the finance committee to know that we did submit about 26 million in expenses to the state of North Dakota for our first draw on the bonding dollars that came through. And if you recall from the last finance committee meeting, we're working through the remaining state match from the old dollars in parallel with the request for the new dollars as well. So we're kind of drawing those down at the same rate was what was decided. So
Can you refresh our memory as to what that transfer was from 2021 to 2022? Do you recall?
As far as the old remaining state dollars, I don't have that number off the top of my head where it's at right now, Mr. Chair, but I can certainly get that and forward that to you. So.
Very good. Thank you.
So moving on to the expense category and the budget tracking, not much has changed over the course of this month. Continuing to report out a majority of our costs are in lands and impacted property mitigation. You can see about line item number 5 or 6 down there. We're at 13.8 million for the year. Most of our other costs are really related to reimbursement for Fargo projects that are taking place in town, as well as legal and engineering and financial costs. So no issues here again this month. Everything's within budget. Everything's been approved through task orders. And so we're sitting year to date at 25 million of our $194 million cash budget. And maybe note just actual expenditures for the project as a whole to date is now approaching the $800 million mark. So certainly, I don't think we need to get into level 2 detail just because there hasn't been that much over the course of the last month. But if there are any questions, I can certainly answer them for the committee.
Questions for Mr. Paulson?
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Pipsqueak.
So obviously there's a healthy balance. So now obviously this year is when kind of the rubber hits the road. How is that going to look? Do you anticipate that balance is going to drop quickly, or can you talk a little bit about how that will work?
Yeah, so right now we have a pretty significant cash budget when you take into account our debt instruments that we have with the WIFIA loan and then all the state dollars. I don't anticipate those really being drawn down over the course of the next year and a half. Most of those dollars are related to milestone payments that get paid to the developer. In simplistic terms, we broke up the project into 250 some buildable units. So for example, a buildable unit would be a county bridge. So we don't make payment to the developer for that buildable unit until it's completed and been certified and we can verify that it meets all the technical requirements. So it's a little bit different than how you would treat a normal city project where you do partial pay estimates every month and you're constantly making draws and money's going out the door that way. So until there's significant construction done where they get to the completion of a number of buildable units, we won't be making any large payments to the developer. We will have a lot of cash reserves basically over the course of the next year and a half, depending upon the progress of the developer.
Can I just ask one more real quick follow-up?
Certainly.
So will you use that? What's the cash? Will you use that first before you start drawing on the loans? Is that kind of the process? How will that work?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Please, Mr. Sprague.
Mr. Paulson, can you tell me just like a percentage of the land purchases that have been completed, kind of what's out there still?
Yeah, I just got asked this question, and I came up with a percentage in my head that maybe isn't as accurate as what Jody or Eric would give you. But I think as far as property acquisition and fee title, We're probably somewhere around the 70% mark. The only remaining property and fee that we need to acquire would be for SE3, 4, and 5. 4 and 5 are on the Minnesota side, and then SE3 would be between the Red River control structure and the Wild Rice control structure. We did initiate the or the flowage easement acquisition phase by submitting appraisals to all the impacted landowners in the upstream mitigation area. And I think we're at about a little over 500 of those flowage easements that need to be obtained. So that process is really just kind of beginning right now. We have acquired some flowage easements already just based off of the landowners getting their appraisal in the mail and saying, yeah, that's great, let's move on. But we'll be working on those over the course of the next few years here. And so we're just kind of getting into the easement part of it, but we've made some pretty significant progress on the land and fee title for the footprint of the project. The only other thing I have for a status update was the administrative budget, and that is included in your packet. No concerns there. We're well below where we would be normally tracking, and part of that is just from some position changes that occurred since we had developed this. But would like to note to the Finance Committee, we are advertising right now for a construction engineering position under Mr. Bakigard. And so we are going through applicants, reviewing those right now. So I do anticipate another staff member coming on board within the next few months. And so that'll start to play into or get us kind of back to where we had anticipated for the administrative budget moving forward. So.
Any questions for Mr. Paulson on the financial report? Then we'll move on to number 7, which is the contracting actions. Again, Mr. Paulson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I only have one contracting action for the committee to consider today. It is a new service agreement with JT Lawn Service for weed control and mowing on property owned by the Diversion Authority. We did do an RFP. We received 3 bids for this service, and JT Lawn Service was the low bid.
Are there any questions?
Just a question on, this is just on the property that's already built, or is this, as we go forward, the concern is on weed control and talking to different people in farming areas. Obviously, we don't want weeds onto their property, but I also heard there's a little concern if you treat with certain elements, it takes a while for that land to clean as well when we're moving dirt around. So is that in that element, or is this just land where we have a dike or have something already done?
Thanks for that question, Mayor. So this would include all of the lands that are currently under our responsibility for maintenance. So this does not include any of the channel lands because those were all given over to the developer for maintenance purposes. So they'll have to take care of their own operations now. But this would include all of the upstream mitigation lands that the authority has acquired, as well as any lands that we've acquired for core construction that hasn't begun yet.
City of Fargo wise, does it cover our dikes in town as well, or is that a separate bill?
City of Fargo covers theirs separately and then gets reimbursed through the authority. Yeah.
Thanks. Do we have to approve this, Chairman? Yes. Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Jacobson, second.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Jacobson, second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the contracting actions for JT Lawn Service. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Sprague.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Reitz.
Aye.
Ms. Madriga.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. You'll note also that there was a line item for the approval of the 2022 cash budget changes. There have been no changes, so there's nothing to report there. Moving on to item number 8, program budget and financial plan rebaseline. I have Mr. Paulson and Mr. Nicholson down for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as most of the Finance Committee's probably aware, we've been working on rebaselining the project. So after we acquired all of our debt instruments and all of the necessary funding from the state and federal government, we wanted to use this time now to take all of those things into account. Our financial plan prior to the closure on these debt instruments and the receipt of all of these grant funds really had a lot of assumptions in there based off of interest rate, when we would be getting the money from the state and the feds. And so we really, now that all of that is certain, we wanted to take all of that information back, put it into our financial model, look at contingency risk and update that since that hasn't been done for some time. We know a lot of risks have changed over the last few years, and that's what our contingency is based off of. So we've been going through all of those exercises, and I'll have Mr. Nicholson kind of give a little bit more detail and update the Finance Committee as to where we're at with that, and then give you some indication of where we're going with this next month. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you, Joel. Chairman Dardis and members of the committee. As Joel has indicated, we've really completed the cost update portion. If you recall, there's two components to our financial plan. One is what we call the Ernst & Young feed, which is a sum of the cost estimates that we believe are appropriate to include in the financial plan through the end of construction. We've completed that process, just got back actually today, another run from Ernst & Young that integrates what Joel mentioned, current financing costs, the benefits of the WIFIA loan, the SRF funds, and all of the way we're financing and paying for the project long-term, both during construction and then debt service long-term. Bottom line, we anticipate the affordability of the project has not changed. So I'll give you some highlights in terms of the numbers. We are preparing some more detailed comparison of the numbers. We did have a chance to have a brief discussion with Bernie and Rick, Chair and Vice Chair, and Rick has asked for some direct comparisons between the 2018 plan and what we're doing now that we're in the process of preparing. We'll have that available for next Finance Committee meeting as an action item, and then a recommendation to the board. We don't believe that the project rebaseline will take board action, but should be approved by the Finance Committee. Let me give you the highlights. As part of that process, we're going to update all the costs to $2022 from $2018. And we are seeing cost increases, as you can imagine, between then and what the project looked like and today. We're seeing cost increase in really three main areas in our budget. One of them is lands. You've seen recently some spike in land cost. We now have updated the program budget to include the most recent appraisals for flowage easements. Those were just received right about the first of the year. So we're going to see an increase in land budget costs of around $120 million from what we were carrying in the budget in 2018 dollars. The second is an update to the soft costs, the legal costs related to eminent domain. With our current experience, we felt it was appropriate to increase the base budget to cover some of those eminent domain costs that we anticipate we might incur, and that's going to account for about $60 million of increased budget. The third is one of your favorite topics, which is the settlement agreement and mitigation. And with the settlement agreement, you'll recall that was signed with the upstream that allowed the project to go forward, plus all of the MOUs that have been signed with each of the entities. It's really a mitigation cost, and that's going to account for about $110 million in increased costs. So all in all, we're up about $180 million in direct uses. That's a little different number, Rick, than what we talked about, but we're still making sure that number is the final one. It's not all on the cost side. Obviously, sales tax revenues are up significantly. That's very helpful. Closing WIFIA at the rate that we did was extremely helpful from a financing perspective. So all in all, the affordability of the project, the debt service that you have to pay is still covered adequately by sales tax revenues. And so we are still in a great position. I think it speaks to the wisdom of the board and the Finance Committee to enable a financial plan that was appropriately conservative, but not so much that you couldn't afford the project. So those are the summary details. I'll look forward to either answering your questions now or when we develop that additional information. Happy to meet with anybody on the finance committee or on the board actually that has a detailed question that they want answered. But you'll see more information at the next finance committee.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Questions? All right, very good. Item B is a rural impact mitigation program, the loan program. Jody?
Good afternoon. So today you have a memo in your packet on pages 50 and 51, kind of reviewing the RIMP program. For those of you, if you can remember, this is a 10-year forgivable loan for active farmsteads and rural businesses. It's implemented by the Cass County Joint Water District Board in North Dakota and by the Moorhead Clay County JPA in Minnesota, and it's ultimately funded by the Diversion Authority. This program was brought to the board in May of 2020. It was approved in May of 2020 for up to $5 million to fund 2 projects. As we're going through the program and we're learning more and more about these farmsteads and rural businesses that need to be relocated, the lands team has identified approximately 15 farmsteads that will need or will qualify for the RIMP program. So today what we're doing is we're coming to you asking for approval to increase the budget to $15 million for us to be able to meet those needs. Because the board back in 2020 did limit the funding available, we will need action on this again to increase that up to the $15 million.
Are there any questions from the Finance Committee?
And Mr. Chair, I'll just note that increase in budget of 15 million has already been included in the overall program cost as an anticipated cost. But what we're asking is the ability to expend an additional 10 million on the program in order to continue with offering the RIMP program to farmsteads to be relocated.
Is that the suggested motion?
Yes, sir.
I move it.
Mayor Mahoney moves that we add an additional $10 million to the Rural Impact Mitigation Program. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Steen. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Sprague.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Reitz.
Aye.
Ms. Madriga.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item C under other business is this City of Fargo 2022 work plan. Mr. Bakkegaard.
Good afternoon, committee members. Today I'm here. I want to just give a update on the progress of some of the projects that the City of Fargo is undertaking for us. As you may remember, shortly after we passed our cash budget last year, we also adopted a resolution to more formalize our process for in-kind work. This is kind of our first step into providing some feedback to you guys underneath that new resolution. So wanted to give you an update. The City of Fargo has been progressing on 3 projects for construction this year. They're nearing the bid phase of those now, so we're getting some of our final estimates in. And as you may anticipate with some of the outside influences going on in the world, there are some potential, or we're anticipating some changes to those budgets. I did want to highlight all of them. There's really one that has some inflationary issues that we need to address formally, but just wanted to explain some of the backdrop of the other 2 projects as well, where we've been able to city staff has been able to economize and actually reduce the overall project cost to provide our same scope of work. So real quick, high level summary, the first project you see there, the FM 19-C, is the Woodcrest area of Fargo in the north side. It also includes a lift station number 39. Originally those were 2 separate projects in our work plan. The city economized from 3 outfalls along that same stretch and reduced it to 1, and then moved this lift station inside of the Woodcrest project. So as you trace back, if you did trace back, there's two different projects we're including here, but all totaled by combining the projects, by economizing the outfalls into one, able to reduce the overall project cost, estimated by about $3 million on that particular project, just through the process of design and planning for the project. The second project you see, the 22-C1, are two lift stations, number 55 and 56. Those projects, again, have progressed very much according to the original plan. Again, the city did do some value engineering and has been able to reduce the overall cost of those projects in principle. Unfortunately, in this case, there are a couple of issues: the constructability of these stations and also the inflationary costs of some of the materials for them have outweighed that, so that particular project, we're projecting an increased cost by about $3.5 million on that particular project. Again, same scope was originally anticipated. Third project is, again, another lift station. That's lift station number 15. Again, here, through the city's more detailed analysis, they were able to determine that instead of having to replace this lift station, they're able to modify it and meet our requirements. So again, in this case, they were able to reduce the estimated cost by about $1.5 million, 1.4. So overall, we're looking at a program where we'll be reducing our overall cash spend for this year. We anticipated, I think if you add that up, it's a little over $22 million. We'll be about $1 million less than that. But again, under the resolution, wanted to make sure we updated in particular the project level costs for 22-C1. Since that one had an increase in cost, we do need to take formal action to approve that for the city to move forward into the bid phase. So that's, if you have any questions, I can answer that. Nathan's here as well. If you have any more detailed questions, we can certainly help answer that as well.
Questions for Mr. Buckegaard?
Mr. Chair, a couple quick questions. First of all, the buyouts, I think we're almost all done, and maybe you don't know that number, but I think we're almost all done. And then I just, out of the city, do you know like how much we have left to do after this as far as being done with projects within the city?
Maybe Nathan can jump in on that one. He's probably got a better off the top handle on that. I have a general sense, but I'll let Nathan.
Sorry, I'm sorry about that, but it's good information just so we know. Thanks.
No, great questions. You're correct. We are down to 4 buyouts remaining. We are still actively working on those. We have still quite a few of the lift stations to be completed, but we have a schedule in place that will hopefully have them all completed by the end of 2026. So we're actively working on design of quite a few of them, and then of course hoping to construct 3 of them this summer.
Can I ask one more follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Certainly.
So Nathan, would you say the majority of what's left are lift stations as far as what's the work left, or is it a mix of things?
Yep, sure. So the Woodcrest project is our last big neighborhood levee project. That one's going to start this year, carry over into next year. That will be, like I said, the last big levee project. And then we still have the Belmont neighborhood down by the water treatment plant that we're working on, a couple of the homes down there, and then one home on Harwood Drive where we still have a gap in the levee there as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any additional questions? If not, as Mr. Buckegaard said, this is an actionable item, so I will need a motion for the increase of the second item that he brought up, $3 million.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Steen.
It's quite a lengthy proposed motion with the materials provided. Without rereading that, I would move that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Steen. Is there a second?
I'll second Mr. Steen's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Reddinger. Been moved and seconded to approve the resolution with regard to the city of Fargo taking up another project, a number of projects. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Sprague.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Reitz.
Aye.
Ms. Madriga.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item D is the Metro Flood Diversion Authority common terms describing the comprehensive project. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This doesn't have any action. This is just for the committee's information. But what we've been doing for quite some time now probably the last 6 months or so, is really kind of taking all of the different terms that we've used over the years and standardizing those. So we worked with legal, we also worked with operations and our consultants to really kind of look at these terms and figure out which ones how we're going to use these and when we should use them. So there isn't, on this first page, on page number 69, there really isn't anything too earth-shattering for the committee to be aware of. I did want to draw your attention a bit to page number 70, which does define a few new terms that folks may not have seen. The first one, the stormwater diversion channel and associated infrastructure. We added the stormwater there because that's the term that we used with EPA and the WIFIA application. And so we have now kind of retermed what used to be the diversion channel and associated infrastructure into stormwater diversion channel and associated infrastructure. And then you can see DCEAI, that was the old term that we used, so we just provided a little bit of context there. And then we did define the SEAI, which we've been using. That's the Southern Embankment and associated infrastructure. One of the new terms that we're introducing here with this document is the LFPAI, which stands for the Local Flood Protection and Associated Infrastructure. So basically the in-town work within the city of Moorhead and the city of Fargo would fall into those. Anything related to the 37-foot stage changes that were induced by Plan B. And then another new term here to define is the MFAI, which is Mitigation Features and Associated Infrastructure. And you can see really those are the settlement agreement items and then all of our things from our mitigation plan in the upstream mitigation area. So I wanted to put this in the Finance Committee packet and the board packet, of course, because we'll be using some of these acronyms and terms. So they're just our first chance to introduce them here at this meeting, and we'll also do that at the board meeting tomorrow as well. So certainly open for any questions, but more for your information.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Questions? All right, that concludes our business for the day. I would like to thank Paul Bartel for the efforts that he has in his continuing working lunches. It's very informative and very much appreciated. So we appreciate as we continue to move forward all your efforts on that. And I'd have to acknowledge also Jody's in some of those meetings, Joel's in those meetings, Martin's in those meetings, and Chris is in those meetings. So thank you all for that. Those working lunches are very, very helpful. Does any member from the Finance Committee have anything that they'd like to bring forward today? Mayor Mahoney.
I just, Dave brought this up as well, but Nathan and the team has done a great job in the buyouts. I remember when we had 40, 50 homes to buy out, and I think most people we finished with felt we were fair, were reasonable to listen to their concerns. And I just want to thank Nathan for all his hard work, because many things he would bring to me, and somehow magically 6 months later they were figured out. So it made it a lot easier for all of us to get through there. But I don't think the public understands that as the Diversion Authority in the city of Fargo took great pains to try to be fair to everybody and work out things. And part of your cost reductions you saw in today's element was just to reworking our engineering for people, so either they're inside the dike or outside the dike. And I just think that's hard, good engineering work and hearing the people. So thank you.
Great point. We often sit here and talk about all of the things and successes that we're having when it comes to the finances or politically and the like of that. But we must remember that the technical team made up of Nathan Birnbaum, Bob Zimmerman, and Jason Benson has been extraordinary, and we would not be in the position we are today without them and the consulting engineers that we have on this project. So good point, Mayor Mahoney. Thank you for that. Thank you. We only have one of them in the room tonight, so we'll look at Nathan and say thank you. Our next meeting will be May 25th. With that, we stand adjourned.